Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Real Talk Family Life, building shatterproof families one brick at a time. We're happy to have you. We hope that you are home and relaxed or on your way home and listening in. We hope to have another episode that is going to be impactful, that is going to be practical, that is going to be meaningful. And as always, we welcome your comments, your questions, your concerns. Please use the chat, raise your hand, use the emojis. For those of you joining us on YouTube, we say good night to you as well. God bless you, and we hope that you are inspired by another episode of Real Talk. Tonight, we have some familiar faces with us. Sister Clara Bola, teacher and counselor in the area of family life. Sister Kadeen Dorset, counselor from Trinidad and Tobago. And Pastor Anthony Chandler. So our topic, we're continuing unwed pregnancies, and we're looking at proactive ways of dealing with unwed pregnancies, prevention, and the way forward. And so tonight we want to do a recap of the last programs that covered this topic and perhaps focus on how we can better educate our families on godly sexuality and the mindset of sexual responsibility within the church and in our communities. So before I give our panelists an opportunity to just introduce themselves and give their initial thoughts on continuing this program, I want to recap some of the key points we heard last week about unwed pregnancies. And these are that we often treat the act and the result as one and the same, and we don't separate the cause and effect. And I love the analogy that was presented in terms of sex on the child, but even just using the idea of a teenager who has taken a car without permission and caused a crash, and the fact that we do give value to our cars. And so, how much more value should we give to the life of a child, whether or not the act of that child coming into this world was one that should be frowned on or that has particular consequences? And then the whole idea of Paul to the church and saying we do have a responsibility as a church in treating the act, but how we must be impartial to all acts of dissonance, all acts of sin. And so we do not magnify one act over the other. We also talked about how we address sexuality and life in general, and not just treating it as a you should not do this, but being open and removing the taboo about these topics. Talk about sexuality in a positive light, but ensure that in everything that's positive, there are always parameters. Being open to questions about sexuality, about sex by teenagers, and even by adults who might say, I don't know if this is what I want to do or if this is permitted. And finally, the whole concept of society labeling people by their mistakes and how we should move away from this practice, and that we should treat everyone on a case by case and an individual level, just as much as Christ had done with many of the transgressors we read about in the Bible. So tonight, I really want to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and give what would be their opening statement about what we can do to better educate families on godly sexuality. So I'm going to start with Sister Clara Bola, then I'm going to move to Sister Kadeen Dorset. And Pastor Chandler, you will bring up the rear for us in those opening comments. Sister Bola, over to you.
Okay, good night, everyone. It's a pleasure again to be a part of this panel and to share information on the topic unwed pregnancies. We deliberated quite a bit the last session on what we should and maybe should not do when it comes to unwed mothers and fathers, because a baby has two parents, but it seems as though the fathers disappear, or they are nowhere in sight, or we have no idea who they are, and they get very little responsibility. But the mother, who has no choice but to be pregnant, show she's pregnant, carry around the pregnancy, seem as though she's the one who gets all the, the consequences for the action. So we need to balance it, and the young man needs as much help as the young woman, because he may just think that what he did was okay, and then he keeps going on, and then the cycle that we have in the Caribbean, where men just have children all over the place, seem to be something that we accept, but we frown on women who seem to not, follow the rules. So tonight we want to look at that in a broader sense, and see how we can help both parties.
Good night. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Kadeen, and I am a counselor with the Life Empowerment Center of Trinidad and Tobago. At Life Empowerment Center, we have 4 pillars: counseling, guidance, mentorship, and training services. And programs such as Real Talk are so refreshing to me. It falls under our guidance pillar. And so I'm always happy to be part of the discussions and part of the panel on this Real Talk. Coming out of last week's discussion with the unwed pregnancy, what I would throw in as a starting thought would be the idea of discipleship. We spoke about the unwed pregnancy, we spoke about the mothers, the fathers, and the church's response of discipline. But the word discipline has a root word, disciple. And if we look at the actual model of discipleship, we can tackle this area as well as a lot of other areas where our young people fall if we really properly model and practice discipleship. The first thing Jesus told his initial followers were to follow me. And so we have to go back to that. Even in discipline root word is disciple. We have to be the model. And Jesus didn't just say, well, follow me, do as I do. He built a relationship. And so that's where I would throw it as a starting point where we need to start. We really need to start building relationships. We really need to have healthy adult role models in the church, in the home, for the younger people. And we really need to practice discipleship. With discipleship, discipline will come in. And that's really where I would like to throw in my thoughts to start.
Well, good night, everyone. And I'm so happy to be here again. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be part of this esteemed panel to discuss this very important subject area. I am Pastor Anthony David Chandler, and I serve as the senior pastor of the Christian Union Church kind of place in St. James, Trinidad. I am a father, a widowed husband, 35 years, and thanking God for that experience. I'm also a grandfather of a 5-year-old who turned 5 just last week. Actually told us that he is a 5-year-old teenager. And he is giving us quite a challenge to his development. It's a sort of joy. But I'm glad to be here tonight. I want to commend Pastor Anthony Henry, our host, and Faith Tabernacle for engaging this topic. And this is where I want to, start, speaking of in terms of this is a very needed conversation that should be, should start a movement within the body of Christ. Yes, as our Sister Bola talk about the effects of the wider society, etc. But the church is our space, and we have been dealing with it, unfortunately, very inept in so many ways over the years. And now we need to engage, and we have to engage at the very highest level, engage our pastors and leaders and get them in the conversation so we can talk to these issues. I don't think we are suggesting that we have all the answers. In fact, we are just, as you all, trying to get a handle of this very important but kind of troubling subject area. But the fact is we need to embrace it, engage it, and to come up with solutions led by the Spirit of God. So I'm trusting all discussion tonight will help and further this direction. Thank you.
So, Pastor Chandler, I'm going to ask you to start debating this time around. As you said, we have to embrace, engage, and come up with solutions. So, we're talking about educating our families on godly sexuality and what that looks like in a practical way from the church's perspective. So, I want to start with that topic before we go back to one of the questions that came out of the last session. And I want to ask you, how can we encourage decision making for sexual purity that's aligned with God's intention for his followers?
So I believe that we have to frontally address the subject of sex and sexuality. It is not taboo. It is part of our humanity. So we need to engage it from the highest level, from the pulpit, engage it in conversation with young people and the church in general as well. The scripture is very open on this, from Genesis right on in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 8. The Bible tells us marriage is honorable and the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. So I speak clearly about sex. In fact, the bed being undefiled, talk about sex being a holy, healthy activity. And in fact, God created sex, not the devil, not in some back room or dark area, but God created sex for both procreation and recreation. And again, that is something not really highlighted, that it is for bringing new human beings into this world, but also for married couple to enjoy each other physically, in that intimacy, being naked and not ashamed. So that's where I believe it starts, that we have to have that healthy engaging our community in terms of sex and how we approach it as something healthy and to expect, but within the parameter of marriage. Then, of course, on the other side of that, when we have to help our young people or people in general to to have that discipline, as our sister was talking about, in approaching this and other behavior activities that we are engaging as human beings. The Bible warns us or tells us clearly in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 concerning sex particularly, because even though it is an allowed activity within marriage, outside of marriage is a different story. I would speak about fornication, and we are cautioned in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18, flee fornication. That is a sexual activity that is not allowed. Adultery, fornication, being involved in sex, not being married, or being married, involved in sex with someone who is not your husband or wife. Every sin that a man does is without the body, but he that commits a fornication sins against his own body. And then he asks the question, verse 19, what? Know you not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, who is in you, who you have of God, and you are not your own. So you speak about our word as human beings, our body, your body is not a playground for somebody to play around with. Your body is sacred, and your body is designed to be a blessing to a husband or to a wife. And so sex is not something to engage in terms of a game. It is serious stuff to enjoy, but in the ambit of marriage. And so we have those two sides. Yes, it is a allowed activity to be enjoyed within marriage, but outside of that, it should be avoided. We should apply discipline because it can affect us, in terms of our spirituality, can affect us because our bodies are designed to bring praise to God and not just to pursue pleasure.
And so, sisters Kadeen and Clara, I want to follow on. Same question about encouraging, sexual purity aligned with God's intention. So Pastor Chandler just gave us basically a good biblical foundation, and he went back to the whole idea of speaking from the pulpit and discipline and practicing good behaviors based on what we hear in the word. What does that look like, Sister Bola, from a family life perspective, and then Sister Kadeen from a counseling perspective for younger people? So Sister Bola, I'm going to come to you first. What does that look like?
So from a family life perspective, I agree with Pastor Chandler. That is something that has to be taught. It is not something that just show up and then you're trying to figure out how to handle it. You need to have that conversation at an early enough age so that children understand what is sexuality and what is sex, the difference between the two. Because sometimes we confuse our sexuality with intercourse. So we need to explain the difference. Because when we leave it, that gray area, we are inciting curiosity. It's like, why aren't you talking about it? Why is it something that you do in the dark? Why is it something we can't ask a question about? Why? And you know, they have all the questions. And sometimes we are too embarrassed to give the answers. But from a family life perspective, I usually say to parents, answer age appropriately. Where did the baby come from? You know it didn't come from the doctor's bag. You know that they didn't give you in the hospital to come home with. You were carrying the baby all along. So it would be good to say that we are getting a baby. You show the area where the baby is, and then you explain to the child in an age-appropriate way where the baby is coming from. Instead of, don't ask me that, why you want to know that? And you know, you brush it off. And later on, they will ask somebody else who may just not give them the information that you wish they had. So from a family life perspective, the same way we teach them, you must wash your hands before you eat. You must make your bed that you sleep in. You must wash the wares that you eat in. We must say to them that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost. Christ is dwelling in you. He has made you for his purpose. And there are parts of you that you are not going to allow anybody to look at or touch, or as the case might be, because these parts are sacred. I usually tell them the parts that are covered, the reason why we cover them is because we don't want any and everybody to look at them or to touch them, or to, when you have your nice china ware, do you put it out on the veranda so that somebody could knock it down and break it? No, you put it in your cabinet or in your buffet or whatever you call it, and you have it hidden away. And if somebody's going close, you say, hey, be careful, you might break my, you know, expensive whatever. So we have to teach that our bodies are similar to that kind of thing. So it's not for everybody and anybody to do whatever they deem necessary, right? So from a family life perspective, you the same way you teach, you brush your teeth, you comb your hair, you clean your clothes, same way you deal with sexuality, so that children are taught from the start how to handle the sexuality.
Yeah, I really appreciate the contribution Pastor Chandler made, as well as Sister Clara. If I have to throw in from the counseling perspective, usually as a counselor, people come into therapy with the problem. And if we have to answer this question about encouraging the healthy decision-making for purity according to God's design, I would say from a counseling perspective, we have to do the opposite. We don't start with the problem. And I see that that has always been mostly the response of the church. We start talking about the problems, or we start talking about the anomalies. But really what we should start with is exactly what the original design is. And I use the analogy of the banks and counterfeit. When you go into a bank, you will never see them having pictures of different counterfeit dollar bills. If they had to do that, it would cover the entire walls of the bank, the halls, the floors, everything, because they are so many versions of a counterfeit out there. What you would see in the bank is a diagram of an original. The original, the prototype, it will tell you all the markings to tell you that this dollar is an original dollar. It will show you all the qualities or the features to look for to know that this is a genuine note. Similarly, for us, if we have to talk even from the counselor's perspective, let's start with what is the genuine, what is the original? What does sexuality from God's design look like? What does sex look like from the Bible? What is the original prototype, the original design? When we get those markings, we get that checklist, we get those qualities and those features, that's where we would start. This is the design. What's happening outside of this? Is this in alignment with the original design? Is this a counterfeit? Is this going to get you in trouble? Is this against the law? Are you going to get locked up if you go down this route? So I would say let's not start by looking at all the counterfeits, gay and this is not right and fornication. Let's start by promoting the original prototype and talking about what the original beauty, the beautiful aspect of sex, what it was created for, the biological aspect of it, the pleasure aspect of it, as Pastor Chandler mentioned, the social aspect of it, etc. So I would say that from a counseling perspective, we start with what the design should be or the original, and then we look at what's happening outside of that.
So then I guess my next question for any of the panelists would be how we protect ourselves against the strategies of the devil when it comes to immodest living, because it doesn't just start with the conversation about sex, right? Even as we prepared for tonight, I was thinking of this song back in the day, secular song that was like, you would go like, let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me, and it's talking about all the cases to Kadeen is my age group, all of the things and that it may bring. Let's talk about sex, right? And I think there's so many other songs or shows or movies. I mean, even anime. I was watching an anime last night, and even they had a fall, male and female engaging in this battle, but the position in which they fell was very sexual as well. And I keep thinking, the eye, what we take in is so important. And there's so many strategies that are being used to lead us astray from that original design, as you said, Sister Kadeen, and the fact that we're not getting the discipleship that we've spoken about. How do we protect ourselves from those strategies when it comes to things like immodest living that then leads to the dangers of sex and sexuality in church or even just generally in life? And I'm going to invite all the panelists to give a contribution on this one. Sister Kadeen, you want to go? Okay, I see. Okay, Pastor Chandler, go ahead. No, you go ahead, Pastor Chandler.
All right, and thank you, Sister Kadeen, for that, and also Sister Vola. But I think what we need to do, of course, is counter the narrative of the enemy, because Satan has done a good job, let's say, of making sex look ugly, dirty, on the room, back room. Sex is $1 billion industry in the world. Something that God has given as a gift, pure and holy, had been so sullied and make it look so ugly that people, have, even believers, depending on their background, etc., may think that it's just something to endure and not to enjoy because of how they were socialized, how they were warned, about this taboo subject. But so we have to come up with a counter narrative in terms of what it is, as was our sister said, separating sex and sexuality, what it is and what it is for, and the value and the beauty of it. And of course, we look out at the pitfalls and the things that the negative things that could follow for approaching the wrong way. So of course, again, the prototype of the devil, he always brings the thing in a way that like he came with Adam and Eve and said that that's not the true story, and try to give us this idea that there's something hidden from us. And so he has done a good job, as I said, and we have this narrative out there. So we have to come up with strategy that be very straightforward, very honest. I think part of the problem that was highlighted earlier is that some of our older our parents, older believers, we just don't know. That's why we shut the people down, because we were never told in any rational way, So we ourselves have been just learning and feeling along as we went along. So we have to inform our people and inform ourselves so we can engage in an intelligent way, answer the questions in an intelligent way, age appropriate, as was mentioned, but because there are answers and it's not anything taboo. And, we have to come to terms with that. As pastors, of course, we counsel people, premarital, etc. And one of the areas you need to talk about is, sexuality within the marriage. And I'm amazed sometimes that people who may have been engaging in sex, and they get very self-conscious when you start that conversation. But of course, it's something that we have to engage frontally, and from a perspective of getting that information, so we can say it with clarity, and the content is valid and valuable. Thank you.
Okay. I will join the conversation. Now, teenagers are very curious. We can't get away from that. So even if as older persons, they may not engage us in that conversation, or we don't feel comfortable enough to engage them in that conversation, we sometimes do hear them talking with their peers. So if we listen in without being too invasive, joining in the conversation, we will hear what they have to say, and then we can address the concerns. Sometimes not at the moment, but you make mental notes, and then later on you address it. But these are things that needs to be addressed. Provide them with information and the skills to act. So don't just, like I think this Pastor Chandler who said, don't just say don't. Because in psychology, once you say don't, it's an automatic do, because your subconscious mind does not take the negative, it takes the positive from it. So you say, don't do that, the child will do it. But if you rephrase that and you give reasons why you think it should not be done, and as older persons, we think, well, they tell us don't do it and we didn't do it. So why should I have to spend time explaining? Already said don't do it. But now you have to take it a step further and explain why you think they shouldn't, right? Be clear and be consistent. So it's not wrong this time, and next time it's okay. If it's wrong, it's always wrong. So this young lady showed up pregnant, and because of to whom she belonged, it seemed as though it's kind of okay. We embrace her, we make her feel good, we show a baby shower, and this other one showed up pregnant, and I tell you, that is the hell has broken loose. If we need to be consistent because they're watching you. If it is wrong, it is wrong. You say to both, it's wrong, and then you treat them, let brotherly love continue. So you treat them in a particular way, right? So I said, provide them with the information and the skills to deal with the information, to act on the values. What is your value? Do you value yourself, or you only know you are valuable when somebody tells you that? Or do you have that inward register that says, I am good, I am beautiful, I can do it, I will make it, or do I have to wait for somebody to tell me that? So these are things that teenagers need to hear, because when they don't hear it from who supposed to tell them and other persons tell them, then they fall into the trap that Pastor Chandler was talking about. Because you see, there's a bear, BWR, advertised on the television. But who is advertising the bear? A young topless woman, or a woman with a really short pants, or or middle outside, or as the case might be. So that's how the devil makes it look very attractive. At the end of the day, when you get pregnant, then all of that seems to be put aside, and now everybody's dealing with, you're no longer beautiful, your legs are no longer nice, your breasts are no, because your whole system now has changed. So we need to do that. So we need to reinforce the values and let them know that they are worth every bit of what God intends for them. Be clear and consistent with how you pass on the information, no favoritism, and provide the information and skills that they need in order to deal with the question of sex and sexuality.
So Sister Kadeen, before you jump in, right, I want to hinge what Sister Bola said on to the next question in terms of how we approach teaching our children to live according to God's design. And I think we've been talking about it for the last few minutes. And the whole idea of should we focus on don'ts, which you're obviously saying we shouldn't based on Pastor Chandler, based on all the contributions thus far, and how we use positive strategies like teaching self-worth and esteem as better suited to discipleship. So I wanted, before you jumped on, to say to Sister Bola, it does sound like you're talking about affirmations for teenagers. And I remember growing up, there was, chicken soup for the soul. And you kind of don't see those things anymore because people don't read books. And so what I'm hearing from you, Sister Bola, is that our strategies need to change. So Sister Kadeen, I want to come to you about the practical strategies for building self-worth and self-esteem among young people. And sometimes it's not even young people, it is adult men and women who don't seem to value themselves. And so they fall victim to somebody saying, you look so pretty today, or you have a nice smile. And that longing, that desire to be affirmed by someone else leads us to be affirmed by the wrong person, and not necessarily, to read the Bible, pray every day, where you get the affirmation about you are a child of God, you are peculiar. And then when we hear those things, we think that's just rhetoric, that's just Christianese. So following on from what Sister Bola said, Sister Kadeen, what strategies can we use? What positive strategies can we use for building self-esteem and self-worth for teenage boys and teenage girls that could possibly help prevent unwed pregnancies?
Okay, well, I kind of want to pull from the last question and incorporate it into this one, because I don't know about anybody else on this panel, but I will admit some of these enticing things, they are very enticing, and they tend to be very rewarding. So you see that strawberry ice cream, I love it, and it rewards me. It releases a chemical in my brain. Never mind the fact that it does other things to my body that is probably not great for me. But the enticing factor, normally it comes from two aspects. It comes from a perception of us needing something, and we are very good at convincing ourselves that we need something. And it also comes from an idea that you lack something. So sometimes it's I need this, and sometimes it's I lack this. And we see it started in the Garden of Eden. They had everything. They had access to all the trees except for this one. And it was this one that they lacked the authority to eat from, that the devil used, the serpent used to entice Eve. Did he really say that? And so even for the young person that looks for that validation or whatever, it comes sometimes from a lack. Am I being validated by my parents? And sometimes we convince ourselves that this is something we need. Is it something that I need? Do I need to hear somebody say that I'm doing well? Do I need to eat this ice cream? Do I need to to go out with this young man in order to be in a physical space with him? Do I need that in order to convince myself that he is God material? Do I need this? So it really is, it's coming from both aspects. And the other challenge we have is that this generation we live in and this time that we live in is an instant gratification age. We have instant coffee, we have instant messenger, we have instant bank loans. You could get a bank loan in an instant, you could get approved in an instant. So we no longer have this striving for excellence. We no longer have this delayed gratification that is part of our culture that's kind of being eroded now, where everything is get rich quick. And so the young people coming up, that temptation and that enticement is greater for them when you're accustomed to getting everything so soon and you have a stumbling block. They are more tempted to find alternate routes of satisfying this need or this perceived lack faster than I need to. And sometimes the alternative route, most cases, are wrong, immoral, against God's will and laws for them. And so for the idea of building them up and, that self-esteem, we're gonna have to, as parents and caretakers, start by addressing children's needs. So a child that understands these are my needs versus these are my wants, a child that is getting their needs met, they will have the temptations, they will have the wants. But once we are meeting children's needs, a lot of, sometimes innocently and with best intentions, they fall into the wrong things because of a need. In counseling, when we get down to the nitty-gritty of it, I just needed to feel loved, or my parents didn't give me that attention, or I don't feel like I belong, and I need to feel a sense of belonging. So, it really does come down sometimes to just ensuring that needs are met. And Jesus did that. Even after he raised Jairus' daughter, he made sure he told them to get her something to eat and something to drink. He spoke to the masses, the thousands, as he was moved with compassion, and he called the little boy with the loaves and the fish, and he wanted to feed them, because sometimes we want to start with doctrine and start with the law when we really, really just need to meet people's needs first before we go down the doctrinal route. So I say let's look at needs and the perception that you lack something, and let's address it from that angle.
Pastor Chandler, I'm going to come to you next, because I know you're a big proponent of, even helping to do play counseling. If we might look a bit too old to connect with the younger generation. So what are your thoughts about strategies for helping to build self-esteem? And it doesn't have to be the young people. It can be persons who are adults but are still lacking that affirmation, or still feel like there's a desire and a need to feel fulfilled that's not being met.
When Killian was speaking, what came to me strongly is the societal problem that we are faced with. Throughout the Caribbean particularly, but probably in other parts of the world also. And that is what we call the absentee or the non-engaged father. Now, we know how that's playing out with our young men who are turning to violence and the gangs and so forth because of the absentee father. But I don't think a lot of attention is played on the young women, the girls, the daughters in that situation. Because daughters, they are looking for affirmation from their fathers. And because they're not getting it, someone out there who comes with the lyrics and give them, that talk, as you said, that they're beautiful, etc., they fall for it. And as a result, we are seeing the results of that. So we have to call and try to get our fathers to get back engaged, not just because our sons are going astray, but also because our daughters are not getting a sense of who they are. A girl should get, the sense of the model of an ideal man from her father. And if he's not playing that role, or worse yet, God forbid, that he is become an abuser, etc., she could be, spoiled for life in terms of understanding or wrapping the mind around, this whole thing about sex. when it is, was forced on her by someone she trusts. But let's say in a better scenario, father understanding his role to be that knight in shining armor for his daughter, to be there to affirm her, to encourage her, to let her know that she's beautiful. Those words should come from him in a very positive way, and being there for the very important transitions in her life. And because of the absence of this, I believe we are seeing where our young women become very vulnerable to older men, vulnerable to men in general, who will come because, again, as probably those, like, Sister Bola and Kadeem, from a professional point of view, can look at those statistics and see the fact that, the women or the young women particularly, who find themselves pregnant outside of marriage or let's say, making poor choices in terms of their sexuality, and looking back in terms of what's happening in the household, and particularly what's happening with the father and the relationship or the lack thereof. So therefore, I think that's an area that we need to spend some time on, focus on, in terms of helping our men to rise up and to be there for their daughters. Because when all is said and done, maybe we are at fault as fathers for not being there to help our daughters get a understanding of what a real man sounds like and behaves. Thank you.
Mr. Bola, do you want to add to the conversation before I want to move on to something Pastor Chandler just raised?
Yes, while Pastor Chandler was speaking, I jotted here, break the cycle. How are we going to break that cycle, Pastor Chandler? Sometimes I wish that circle, there was an eraser that you could, erase part of it. So when you get to that point, it doesn't connect. So you have to find a different way to do things. But I'm afraid that the cycle continues. And we see it with the onward mothers. So I did not have a father figure in my life. I tried to find one in a young man who showed interest. And now I have this child who he says is not his, don't call his name. And here I am coming back home to bring another child to join the cycle. And there's nobody here to support me. And then I'm looking for support. And then I find myself with another child because I can't mind somebody else's child, I have to mind my own. And the cycle, that terrible, vicious cycle, just keeps going on. So where do we get our men to understand all that Pastor Chandler said? I agree with every single word, but where do we get to that point where we can erase that section here? And when they get here, realize, no, we need to do things differently for our young ladies, for my girls, for my daughters. What I am doing to this lady, would I like somebody else to do that to my daughter?
Mm-hmm.
No, they won't like that, but it seems as though they don't have the level of control to say, no, I am not going to do this. It's just a moment of pleasure, which leaves a child, that very nice moment of pleasure leaves a whole child that somebody now who doesn't have the level of support has to contend with. And in the process, like just this week, I saw a grandmother who is quite young herself taking her grandson to school, and he didn't look very happy. And she said, so you're giving me trouble this morning? And I said to him, today is not a school day. And he shook his head, but she said, I can't leave him with his mother. She will give him lash all day. Because that mother has, he's about 6, but she has 2 other children after him. And I'm sure she hasn't turned 25 yet.
Wow.
That's, that's what has to happen. So although it may not be a school day, but the grandmother has to send him to school to save him from the wrath of his mother, who already has 2 other children to look at. And that's the plight of the onward mother. plight, I call it. So I say, I wish we could just break the cycle, erase the circle, and do things differently. So we have to try to get this generation to understand that you do not have to do it this way. You can do it differently. They did it that way, but you don't have to do it this way. You know, I say your mother had you at 16, you don't have to have a child at 16. You could finish school. And I usually say to them, you don't want to put on your little high heel shoes and have your little bag hang on your shoulder, and your little suit, go into your job. I say, well, if you get a child now, all of that dream's gone through, you know? So it makes these are some of the practical things that we have to see and make them understand. Not so much, you know, the big philosophical as counselors, you know, we have different ways of doing it, but sometimes you just have to break away from that and just speak to the person in front of you and say, this will be the consequences of your action. If you keep doing it this way, tell me, what do you think will happen? And then they will say, this will happen. So I say, everything you do, there are consequences. So are you willing to take this option or this one? I say, if you don't take this one, then this one will be the option. So if you keep having sex with whoever it is, you will get pregnant eventually. Is that what you want? Are you ready to become a parent? You think you would be able to manage, you know, and you just kind of spread it out in front of the person so that they can help themselves to make that decision. No, I don't want that for myself. Therefore, I have to do things differently.
Yeah, thanking you all for the contribution. I'm thinking of what you said, Sister Bolan. Is in principle, I'm hearing it, and I'm saying it works as a deterrent. But we talk about, you know, how society sometimes glamorizes some of these things, and it almost seems as if as pastors or as counselors, we have to work so much more to make those deterrents. And even for the unwed parents who find themselves there to say all is not lost. You can have a life, but it's just going to be so much harder now that you have to put this child first if you want to be responsible and even break the cycle when you're there. So, well, I see a question in the chat, so I'll put a pause on that conversation and read for you. Our Caribbean society has been groomed into a culture of open sexuality. For example, the music and the carnival are sexually explicit. Parents encourage their children to gyrate their bodies in lewd contortions, and sometimes the rhythm in the church lend to carnivalesque behavior. So the question is, how and where do parents start to extract some of the sexual content from the home and from society? How and when do parents start to extract some of the sexual content from the home and society? And I think that, go ahead.
If we talk about Christian parents, then we shouldn't have the content in the home. It will be in the society. It will be all around, but our homes will be different. The Bible says, train up a child in the way he should go. And when he is old, he will not depart. And I'm always thinking that departure here doesn't mean he might stay, but he will always remember what was taught. And what was taught will help to make decisions. So how and where do parents start to extract some of the sexual content from the home and society? You have to start child training from the very start. If you don't start early, when it gets later, it will be harder to get the idea over. So you have to start, and you have to start early. Train up the child the way that he should go. The first 7 years of the child's life is the most important years. Whatever you train them there, they never forget. So that's where the training starts. But we have become very modernized, and mothers don't stay home anymore and train children because we have to go to work, because we have to feed them. So we drop them in front of the daycare at 7 o'clock, and we don't pick them up until 5. And heaven knows what they are exposed to all day. Additionally, when we come home, we're tired, we have things to do. So we give them a tablet, or we put them to sit down in front of the television, and all of these things are happening there, but we don't have time to screen it because they're quiet and they're giving us a chance to do what we have to do. So how do you start to extract the sexual content? You have to watch what the children are exposed to. What do they hear? Have that conversation. We sometimes say they talk too much, but it's okay for them to talk, because when they talk, you know what is happening. Allow them to say whatever it is happened for the day. How was your day? What happened today? Who said what? You know, what did teacher say? Find out. So as they get older, they are accustomed to speaking to you. So they will come and say, you know, this has happened, somebody told me this, or heard that, or what do you think about so and so? And then we will be able to guide better.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Sister Kadeen and Pastor Chandler to chime in. But for those of you who are now joining us, whether on Zoom or on YouTube, this is Real Talk Family Life, and our topic tonight is a continuation of the last program, Unwed Pregnancy. Tonight, we're focusing on prevention and the way forward. So you might be hearing a lot about sexuality and teaching and building up, and not so much on unwed pregnancies, but you can listen to the last program and you would hear where the conversation started. Tonight, we're focusing on prevention and the way forward. I also want to thank everyone for joining us, but I especially want to welcome Reverend Dr. Roger Samuel, who I see online, Pastor Joseph Griffith, and Dr. Patricia Neff, stalwarts within the program, who always give their support, whether they're on the panel or not. And to everyone else who is a staple participant, we appreciate you just as much. So I want to come to Sister Kadeen. What can we extract? And then Pastor Chandler, I'm going to come to you before I ask one of the questions from the last program that I think we should address.
Yeah, the word extract, I want to dissect the word extract, because the truth is we live in the world, but we try not to be of the world. But the influence is there, you know. You could be growing up in the most Christian home like I did, and still hear soca music because the neighbor would play it, or it's in a taxi or the school bus are picking you up. So, you know, soca, carnival is part of our culture. So I don't know if we could necessarily extract it, but the question was about his sexuality. So I want to make the distinction that each child at a different stage and a different age has a different understanding of sexuality. So I will use myself as an example. When I was younger, again, I grew up in a Christian household, but it just in my blood is, I don't know if it's the Africanism from the motherland or whatever, but certain beats, I just like certain music. And I remember being the mascot. Psychologists and counselors will know it. There's a child in the house that is the mascot. And from small, I like to dance. And my family, my aunt and everybody, they would put me to dance with people on display. And at that age, I probably 5, 6, 7, I was not in any mental space to understand that the dancing and the gyrating was anything sexual. At that age, it would have been pure innocence. It would have been the response of the adults. Oh my God, look at waist, and you know. And even now, for those, the children of that age, I don't think, I'd like to not think that they are putting a sexual connotation to it. However, like Sister Bola said, these things build the foundation. And we do know, us at our age and stage, we know carnival and these things, they give rise and they give room for those kind of sexual compromises. It leads to whining on somebody, could create a physical response in a man, those kind of things. At a later age, children are at. So I've seen, similar to myself, I've known little children, you would see it, a little girl will be doing a split and you have to tell her, you can't split like that, or you can't bend over like that. They don't understand those contexts. But as they get older, and that same little girl, like myself, becomes aware of her body, becomes a little more aware your sexual development is happening, you start to feel a little discrepancy happening here. Like, no, this, you get a look from people, you realize that's not a normal look. So you start to become more aware and you understand that there could be sexual connotations to these things. So the conversation is an ongoing conversation. We don't really, I can't see it as fully extracting it, but it's really just reinforcing the godly principles, reinforcing your body as a temple, helping children as they go through the different stages to understand sex and sexuality. So it's really just an ongoing conversation. I don't know for us in the Caribbean if we could fully extract it, but that's just my take on it. I stand to be corrected.
Well, in fact, I want to agree with Kadeen in terms of that concept of we are part of the society. And, even that Sister Bola was talking about, and rightly so, about making sure our homes are safe places in terms of information and censoring and so forth. But the fact is, in the schools, they have children's carnival, and they're happening, and and the wider society is there. And so, how do we treat with that? I remember my girls, of course, went through school, etc. But we made a decision. I think when they were about 8 or 9, I think I was there about, because their experiences growing up was carnivals, camp, and that was it. But we decided that they need to get an exposure to this culture. And so the aunts who would, we took them, asked them to take them to the children's carnival for, 1 year. And they went and they saw it and they, etc. And, that literally satisfied that kind of aspect in terms of, because from then on, it was right campus experience and so forth. And they never had a desire, never wanted to be part of that, because they were exposed, let's say controlled exposure to that environment. And so we have to be careful about trying, again, that whole curiosity aspect of blocking them out completely and saying, don't watch that, don't do this, etc. Because even those who don't understand, they'll be drawn to it. And I think something else that was said in terms of that comment about the whole question of how we express our sexuality as Caribbean people, and whining and gyrating has become, a staple in all our dances. And now we have gone a step further, where people, simulate the sexual act by this, whining back on somebody, or it's really, a sexual act with the clothes on. But there you have it. And I remember one of the Caribbean islands, particularly, I visited more than once, and there was this particular sister. Boy, in church, the rhythms that we play and clap to, boy, that sister had a waist that you had to really consciously look away, preach or whatnot. You had to look away because she had that kind of moves. Maybe she wasn't aware of what was happening, or maybe it just got spontaneous, but probably somebody needed to tell her, well, she's able to cool it because of your shape and your size or whatnot. But it just comes natural. But what are the effects? So we need to, our children understand that we are in a wider society. We need to control the exposure, but we cannot pretend that they won't know or they won't hear when you understand. Today I had a moment with my grandson, I say, or 5, and in our conversation, he used a word that I thought was inappropriate. I said, Benji, that word isn't a good word. And he said, well, I heard it somewhere on some program he was watching it. I heard it on some program. But I said, no, that's a good. And right away, he said over the sentence and used another word, a proper word. And, I was so happy that I was able to point that out to him. And, he accepted it because, this way he got it from some show he was looking at. And he saw the character use that word. I said, no, that's not a nice word. And so, we need to really be engaging our children and not get that surprise and shock and shut them down and both them and say, bow, slap, what do you say this word? But getting it right. Thank you, Melia.
Thank you. So no, it really segues into a few uncomfortable questions, 3 questions that I want to pose to the panel, because we talk about sexuality and controlled exposure, laying the foundation, and then life happens, right? As Kadeen said, there's carnival. The question posed talks about culture and whether you're from Trinidad and Tobago or the region, whether it's dancehall culture, calypso culture, etc. And so oftentimes we think that the unwed pregnancy is consensual. So I have three questions here. One, how do we teach sexual responsibility for men and women in our society where men are praised for being sexually deviant and women in church are vilified or punished for even the simplest demonstration of immodesty? So we praise the men for being sexually deviant and we vilify women for even the slightest demonstration of immodesty. Then another question that came out is that we often assume that most unwed pregnancies result from consensual relationships, but that's not always the case. So how do we ensure responsibility for power relationships that often happen and lead to unwed pregnancies, especially where there's a significant age disparity? And then the third one I want to ask about is beyond pregnancies. How do we address the issue of older men or women pursuing an unwilling participant of the same or different sex? And the reason why I bring same here is if we're talking about deviance and we want to be open and honest, we have to acknowledge that, relationships are not always male-female, but they can be female-female or male-male. And understanding that the pursuit of some of these deviant relationships is not always outside the church, but some of the victims are actually the consequence of silence from within the church. And I remember in preparing for this topic, Pastor Henry had given us an example about, a transgender male, and how that experience or how pursuit within the church actually led to this behavior. And of course, let me offer the caveat that we're not saying this happens in all churches, but these are extreme examples that we often need to engage so that our membership is prepared to deal with those situations. So I am going to ask Sister Bola to open us up. You can choose one or you could maybe touch on all, and then I'm going to ask Sister Kadeen and then Pastor Chandler, I'm going to ask you from a biblical standpoint in terms of principles, and then, just what advice can you offer when we deal with, one, the vilification of women, but the praising of men who are sexually deviant, power relationships that lead to unwed pregnancies where there's a significant age disparity, and then the pursuit of an unwilling participant. And I'm saying it and I'm even thinking of what if that person is a 16-year-old female who then becomes pregnant? What do you do then? So Sister Bola, I want to start with you.
Okay, so I think I mentioned earlier that the absentee father came from way back when. Right? It's I may use the word, it's historical that women carry the children and the men are allowed to, and I'm using the word loosely, are allowed to just keep manufacturing more children. Right? In our context in the Caribbean, we do not frown too much, and I'm saying too much, on the men for doing that. It's like they are okay if they do that. It shows that they are manly, they are macho, they know how to get many women. But on the other hand, women will be considered very promiscuous if you have one child for this person and then you have 2 or 3 for 3 other persons, then you are called promiscuous because you are not managing your sexuality well, and the decisions that you make have left you with so many children. I have known of persons with 8 children for 8 different persons, just looking for help from one to the next and then just getting more children. and then men moving on. And I have also known of men who have wives married in their homes, but they have a mistress somewhere, and the mistress and the wife, they are having children at the same time. So he has double family. I've also known of persons who have children outside of marriage and take the children from that mother and bring home to his wife because it's his child, and then she cannot say, no, I am not taking care of it because he is the head of the household, and you know, he has that privilege. But if she had a child before, then he will have to determine the kind of treatment that the child gets. So it seems as though we have glorified men in doing these things, and the younger generation have looked on, and now the cycle, as I said just now, seem to continue. Now, how do we as church family say to our young men, this is not what God intended? Bible says, let every man have his own wife. So you have become of age, you need to get a wife. So you have one wife and you stay with that one wife. But what do we say to teenagers who are not really ready to be married, but they have 3, 4, 5 girlfriends? And before, Pastor Chandler had to maybe walk to go and visit his girlfriend because transportation was not as now. No, you don't have to go anywhere. You have 5 of them on the phone. You have them on Facebook and Twitter and, you know, all of these things, and you are keeping up the relationship with all of them. Now, what do we say to our young men? We are saying that it is not what we expect you to do. Yes, you can have many friends, but you should not be leading them on, making them believe that you are very interested in them, and all you're doing is just leading them on. So we have to say to our young men, this is not what God expects, and the church does not agree that you must keep up that pattern. It is not something that you want to help them to cultivate, but rather it's something that you want to frown upon, but by telling them in a way that make them understand that these persons are depending on you in a relationship, but you do not really care for them. So why are you leading them on? Like the older people would say, you know, the person is not wife material, so why are you leading the person on? Why do you want to leave a child with this person who you know is not really somebody who you want to carry your child or to grow your child or to be mother to your child? So these are just, we have to be frank and open with the conversation. We cannot cover it and just let it go. But we have to say this has been a trend. It is a worrying trend. Most of you have grown without knowing who your father is, who has never claimed you, or has never really done that fatherly role in your life. Do you think that you would like to have your own child or children going through the same situation? There was no money for school, there was no books, there was no shoes, you know, there was all your needs were not met. Do you think you would like the same thing for your own child? So you kind of open this can, let the worms wiggle out, and as they wiggle out, you deal with them as they come. So the absentee father. If I should just touch on the power relationships, I think we mentioned at the last time that these relationships do have economic benefits. So the person you are with is not of your age or stage in life, but because you have benefits getting from the person, you are stuck in that kind of relationship. Some of it is voluntary. Others of it is pressured. So you are pressured into that kind of relationship, and then you find yourself stuck and you're not sure how to get out. So we encourage our young persons, ladies as well as young men, because it goes both ways, that you try not to get yourself tangled up in these kinds of relationships, because it might be easy to get in, but very difficult to get out. And is that really what you want for your life? Is that how you esteem yourself? Bible says you are fearfully and wonderfully made. He also said, I care for the sparrow, that little brown bird that look as though you don't have much worth. Won't I care for you? You know, so church has to help to teach these kinds of values to our young persons, so that they will understand that I do not have to do this because God can provide for me. And then members, we as members should find ways to support. You know, sometimes we are very selfish with our supporting. When something happens, we say, oh, that little girl worthless too much. But she going with that big old man. But we saw she had needs that, as Kadeen said earlier, but did we try to help her satisfy the need? No, we didn't. But when somebody else now is helping her to satisfy that need, we run ahead and say so many different things. So if we pay attention to what is happening, then some of the situations, we might be able to diffuse them before they, you know, they blossom into some ugly situation.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on Sister Clara talking about the needs not being met. And I will contribute on that whole aspect of the power disparity in relationships where some, you know, the person is older and much younger. And I would say that the whole idea of power disparity is really just an idea. You know, God created us, every one of us. We were born with what we needed to survive in this world. And even for the newborn baby, it has to be harnessed, it has to be developed, it has to be channeled, etc. But even the Bible says every one of us was given even a measure of faith. I mean, we can't do everything. That's why we need God. But we were all born with what we needed to survive. And this is a big tenet in counseling and shameless plug for Life Empowerment Center of Trinidad and Tobago. This is something we encourage. It's called empowerment. So even that young girl who is 7, 8 years younger than the man, because of the age disparity, there's not necessarily a power disparity. It is a social construct. I would say that, put up in just salt, right? What I mean is that, again, for Life Empowerment, we are big on empowerment. What we do is empower people to understand that you do have power. Even the newborn baby have a sense of power. I was reading about a big debate online. Somebody posted a question. She was in a restaurant. Somebody came in with a newborn baby. The baby was screaming to the top of her lungs. And she asked the waiter, kindly, can you put me to sit somewhere else across the room? And the mother overheard the conversation and started to curse and carry on. So the lady asked the question, was I wrong? And it started a whole online debate. That newborn baby had power. That screaming voice was so annoying. And the conversations led into, you know, mommy should not have a newborn child in a restaurant. People come to restaurants for different things, and that child should be at home and her needs, the baby's needs being met, etc. So even a newborn baby has a sense of power, right? Outside of that, I would give another example. This is a case study, no names to remain anonymous, etc. There's an 8-year-old girl who, her mother had one sibling, her uncle, and for some reason, something happened to uncle overseas and he got stuck overseas for many years. So this little girl never met her uncle in person. She only knew him from phone calls and FaceTime and video calls. And fast forward, at 8 years old, she first met her uncle. He came home to live with her and mom. And mommy noticed a change in the daughter's behavior since the uncle moved in. And she would run and hide behind mommy whenever he come to greet her or whatever. She noticed some little changes, and mommy did the responsible thing. She said, this is my brother. I only noticed the behavior since he came. My daughter is acting different. She talked to her. She didn't get anything out of her. So she decided, let's go to therapy. Let's, just to check and see. And in the process of this 8-year-old girl getting therapy and counsel, it came out in therapy that she was uncomfortable with her uncle's display of affection. Now, there was nothing sexual, but there was one incident where he grabbed onto her. She was running away because she doesn't like the hugging, and he bit her on her back. And she didn't know how to tell mommy about it. And at 8 years old, she already knew or felt uncomfortable with that level of affection. Now, mommy and brother hug each other. He's accustomed to that from when they were growing up, but this child is growing up in a different time, and those kind of embraces had her feeling uncomfortable. And in the process of therapy, the therapist had to go through with this child. You are not she really thought the reason she couldn't say anything to her uncle and let her mommy know that she was uncomfortable is because there was a running dialogue from mommy. I haven't seen my brother for so many years, and I just want him to be happy. And this little girl accepted and assumed the responsibility for making her uncle happy, even though what he was doing to her was making her feel uncomfortable. So she had to learn that you have a certain level of control. Even though he's an adult, you are allowed to feel uncomfortable. You are allowed to say, I don't want any hugs. I don't want you to kiss me on my cheek. I don't like it. So the therapist had to teach her to do a secret handshake. Tell uncle, no, you can rest me with the hugging. Let's do a handshake and teach her ways to manage that energy from him, and also to help her understand as a child that she has rights. So I'm going back to this empowerment and the idea of the power differentiation in the relationship. Let us even teach children. It's not something in our Caribbean culture because we grew up with the do as I say parents and not as I do. And thankfully for me, growing up as a child, I think that's probably why I ended up in counseling. I was never censored really as a child. The only thing that I felt in my household, they limited my options. I have to do this because you said so. And I always had a problem with that growing up. Why should it be because you said so? Why don't I have options, or why don't you tell me X or Y? And if you choose X, like Sister Clara said, this is going to be the consequence. And if you choose Y, why did it always have to be because I said so? So Caribbean parenting, we tend to not do that. So it may be something that we don't really accept, or we don't indoctrinate in our parenting. But children do have rights. And once we start talking about that with children, not like the American system, not to bash any other country where, children's rights tend to be a country with liberalism and individualism. It could go extreme left, but children have rights. And that empowered child from small understanding that can be taught to be respectful to somebody at an older age. So at 13, even though my needs are not being met by an absent father, a man grooming me, and I'm uncomfortable with it, despite the fact that he may buy me the cell phone because mommy can't afford it. If she is being talked to before 13 and understanding that she has rights and that she is powerful, she does have power. She has the power to say no. She has the power to say, I don't want this. She has the power to say, I'll work with mommy with a savings plan and see if I can get my own phone. So we just have to do that empowerment. That is what has to happen in these cases with this age disparity, because let us be real, somebody older in chronological age may not be at a higher level of maturity. And this is coming from somebody who was always told I am wise beyond my years. So I may not be the right person to say it because, I never respected people based on their age or their position, but on what they show and how they earn that respect. And we need to teach children that as well. It's not necessarily because somebody is older that they are necessarily more powerful than you. And in counseling, that's what we do. We empower people. We don't make the choices for you. We teach you that you already have in you what you need to survive. And it's just about harnessing it. And Dr. Samuel could back me up on this one. Yeah, that's my contribution.
Thank you so much, ladies. All right, so going back to the male-female dichotomy within the church, I think we have to go back to biblical days and the setting, the Bible setting and cultural setting, both in Old Testament and New Testament, where you had the male large and in charge. You had that kind of context of women being silent, etc. And so we grew up and not separating the cultural context of the scripture, from the reality of even Jesus' approach to women. He had women as part of his ministry. He empowered them in terms of activity. And Paul also did, as one of the leading apostles, in terms of empowering women and encouraging them. So the Christianity has had a definite effect on women's rights and giving them their voice, etc. But many of us, preachers, teachers, etc., men, church, etc., because of that general setting of scripture, which had the women second, and behind, that has caused some of the problems that we identified. Yet, though, I don't agree that within the church that we have, let's say, well, I know in the world it is probably so, where we big up or not encourage, but speak positively about the man, his sexual progress, he's a man, etc. In church, while it's not done like that, I don't think we come out in that way. What we do, or what we are guilty of, is ignoring. We do not censor, the young man's behavior, irresponsible behavior in terms of the sexual conduct, as we would the young woman. And that is wrong. So why we don't say, well, you're a young man and so while oath and so forth. I don't think generally we'll have that attitude in the church. But what we do is we ignore their behavior, or even if we don't ignore it, we don't sense it as much as, of course, unfortunately, the reality is it's a woman that carries the big belly and she carries the shame. And the men, many times, they have a free pass, as it were. So we have to come to the terms of that question of being fair across the board. I think Sister Bola mentioned that about, being consistent. The Bible tells us in Ezekiel, the soul that sins shall die, whether it's the father, the son, that person will be responsible for their actions. So therefore, whether it's the male or the female, we need to be very fair across the board and call out our men, our older men particularly. I like the idea that Kidim said, consider empowering our young children to speak up when they are uncomfortable. And I remember having to, take some action in terms of a certain one of our workers who, wanted to be part of the children's ministry, but more than one child had indicated that they feel uncomfortable how Uncle so-and-so would hug them and so forth. And because of that, I had to very, diplomatically direct Uncle from children's ministry to another ministry. It was a little difficult at first because, because they didn't accuse him of doing anything, let's say, inappropriate. But as Gideon said, the young children, they were feeling uncomfortable. And that was enough for me to say, hey, you're not. And I think that brings us to the question of, as a church, we need to be very proactive. We need to do background checks in terms of our children workers. And this may seem kind of, why should we go that way in terms of, well, Sister Clara was mentioning to us about our legal responsibility in terms of reporting inappropriate behavior or actions that we know of, we learn of, we can't ignore it. But even at the same time, we need to take those proactive steps as a church. And persons that we are not sure of, do due diligence and find out, whether by a direct interview or background checks, former church, former associates, etc., or even if there's a sexual offenders list or whatnot. Hey, God forgives and we thank God for that. But people with certain weaknesses, certain, challenges, we can't ignore it. Yes, they are human in Christ, etc. But a person who have had a challenge with alcohol, you have to let them know that, okay, while somebody could take a social drink, you can't. Because, that person may be able to handle the social drink. Not that we're encouraging that per se, but that person can do it. You cannot. So we have to let them know. So a person who have had those kind of challenges in their controlling their sexuality and, being inappropriate, we have to be very upfront and perhaps very forceful in those decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Chandler, because it's just about 9 o'clock and you actually answered what we can do now, as a church to help with this topic. But one question, if everyone would indulge me, I'd like to get to is the fact that sometimes it feels like the church is speaking, but the world has moved on, and how do we align? How do we engage youth in a way that they know we're really hearing them, that we understand them, that we empathize, and we're able to respond to their concerns in modern society? And I think, for the toddlers or younger children, Pastor Chandler, you've just given a practical example, of dealing with a situation where children are uncomfortable. But for adolescents or for teenagers, for young adults who are saying the challenge, the enticements in society are real, and we don't feel like we're being heard or understood, or even like the adults are in touch. What would your advice be to the church community on helping them realize that we hear them, we understand them, and we engage? And then once you've given that contribution, feel free to give your one takeaway from this evening's session. So Sister Bola, I'm going to come back to you first.
Okay. The church needs to come up to speed with this generation, because our leaders are older persons like me and Pastor Chandler, and we have younger people like Katie and yourself. We have that generation gap that needs to be filled. Okay, take for example, the older ones of us who are not into the technological age. We still read all the Bibles, we come and hear all the preacher have to say, and we are very conservative in discussing different issues and so on. Now, we have to come up to speed, learn to use the technology, get in with the young people. And I think they like to have us around, but we can't, how should I put it? I want to be very careful how I put this. We can't always push the Bible at them. You have some people, you avoid them because every time they see you, they tell you what the Bible says. So our young people, we show them, we tell them, we explain to them, we give them opportunity to say what they're thinking. Like I would ask them, what do you think about so-and-so? And then I allow them to speak without me trying to, push this and that, push knobs, as we would say. Because you ask them what they think, so let them share their thoughts. That's the only way we can know what's going on in their minds, and then we will be able to guide. Because trust me, they know a lot more than we do. They may not know it in the right way, but they know a lot of things. And then the language that they use, they might be having a conversation around you, and what you think they're talking about is not really what they're talking about. So you have to, get in sync with the language. Sometimes I ask them, what you really mean by that? Is, well, I don't know that, man. This is that, and so on and so forth. So I am keeping, a mental note of what it really means. So the next time I hear it, I know what it means. And I think it's Pastor Chandler who said he was speaking to his grandson and he mentioned whatever the word was, and you said, no, that's not an appropriate word. And he said he heard it, and you were able to engage him, and he was able to come up with a different word. So instead of bashing him for the word, you told him it wasn't a good word. I'm sure you had a conversation, and he must have asked you why and so on, because they don't just take it as you say, and then you chose a different word. So I am believing, based on my own experience and observation, that we have to give opportunity to hear concerns, to address issues, just to have general conversation, you know, like we are having now. You can throw it out to them, ask them what they think or they feel about it, you know. Like I was asking, we had this discussion about why is our young people leaving church? And I am asking, why is our young people leaving church? They say, you don't know why young people leave in church? I say, no, why they live in church? And they were able to, everybody gave me a different reason why young people live in church. And I say, oh, okay, so that's why they live in church. You know, I never really thought of it. So I am engaged in the conversation, and I'm not saying, oh, that's why they live in church, which is different. Oh, that's why they live in church, you know? So I am interjecting here, empowering them to speak and not being judgmental when they do. You know, as soon as you hear something that you didn't like to hear or not in sync with you, you jump in and start bashing on them. No, we have to be non-judgmental. It doesn't take away, does not take away, but it allows us to add to what they are thinking. But you know, I have been looking at this situation, and this is what I'm thinking. What do you think about that? And they might say, well, yes. I say, have you ever thought about, now I am bringing in other Bible principles, I'm bringing in other readings that I may have done. Have you ever thought of that? No. But yes, that is something you need to think about. So let's talk about that, right? So I am looking at the older ones, how we can engage them, because you know what, as soon as you start preaching to them, they shut down and they're not hearing one other word that you say. So, you know, we have to be mindful of that as well. Words of affirmation, y'all are doing very well. What? Y'all look really good today. I was so happy to hear you read the scripture. I was so, you know, I heard you in the discussion, and I feel so proud of y'all. Words of affirmation, you know, because as social beings, we thrive on these things. We are social as well as there is the spiritual part of us. So yes, we have to do that, remind them that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, that we are an heritage of the Lord. He delights in us, but he also gives us instruction. Flee youthful lust. Every sin you commit, it's outside of the body. But if you're engaging sexual activity, it is, remember what sexual activity entails, and you may just be putting other things in you, or you may be taking out other things from the other person. What about all the diseases you can get? What's about, so it's not only the pregnancy, you know, and you engage them so they live with an understanding of what you're trying to say, instead of you just push the information at them. They are able now to, you know, work with it. And then somebody may come afterwards and say, you know, Pastor, I was thinking about so and so and so. What you find about that? So you already got into them. So now they're willing to open up to you, ask you questions, you can give suggestions and so on. So we have to realize that the age has moved, and if we're not careful, they will take all our young people and move away with them. So we have to change, not our principles and our values, these never change, but we do have to change our methods of handling them. So that will be my closing statement.
Thank you. And quickly, Sister Kadeen, and then Pastor Chandler, just in the interest of time.
Yeah, I like that last point about changing the method, because that's really what that's one of my takeaways. We spoke about it earlier about changing the narrative. And, the truth is, the word of God, and God is immutable, unchangeable. That's the only thing that remains the same. But life changes. Things have changed from 2000 plus years ago when the Bible was first written. Things change, and we tend to forget that we can hold on to absolute truths while changing activities and behaviors. We can change our approach without changing the word of God. We can change our approach without changing the value system. We could change our approach without changing what God says and his laws. We don't have to, those things cannot be changed. And, I'm drawing an example. For me, when I was growing up, I remember reading the book of Ecclesiastes and taking this vanity of vanities literally to mean that I thought the teacher was saying that everything we do is just being vain, as like you're full of yourself. You're not full of God. You are self-absorbed. And it's only later on in life when I didn't even know you had different versions of the Bible. So growing up, the Hath and the Seth and the Beloved and those things were a little bit much for me sometimes to break down. And then fast forward years later, the Bible app was invented, and now I could flip my phone horizontally and an icon will come up, and I could literally read two different versions of the King James side by side. And there I found vanity of vanities meant all of life is futile. I thought it was me being vain looking at myself in the mirror. So thank God for technology and for different translations. It doesn't change the word of God. It makes it easier for somebody else to understand, because remember, the Bible, most of it was written in Greek or some in Hebrew, which is not our first language. So these things help. So we're not changing the word of God, we're just changing the way we do it. So we're pulling out our phones and we're on the Bible app. You're thinking the young people FaceTime and in church because they don't have a physical Bible that they're drawing up in. Those things have their place and they have their time, but we have to be able to change with the times. And the narrative really needs to change. Like, I even for this topic, I started to question, why do we say explore your sexuality and discover your sexuality? There's nothing to explore and to discover. We were made with there's a prototype. I cannot decide, let me explore my nose and see, I could decide to do it. Let me explore this nose and see if I could stand on it. Now, there will be some kind of repercussion. It could break. I could probably defy gravity, but was that really what my nose was made for? Why would I want to explore my nose? It was made to do something specific. So even the language and the terminology for us in the church, we may not be able to make it more enticing than what the world is offering, but let's start talking alternatives. We know what is enticing. So tell me, young person, what is so wonderful about this? Okay, so is there an alternative? So Kadeen, you love to eat the strawberry ice cream because it does something. Is there an alternative that is healthier? You could go and exercise, you get the same level of endorphins released in your body, that, it might taste nice, but we just have to engage in talking, changing the narrative. And that's my takeaway in terms of this entire, we really have to change our approach. We don't change the word of God, but we have to change the narrative.
And Pastor Chandler is going to bring us home as soon as we unmute that mic. Let me see if we could. Pastor Henry, can we unmute him from your?
Before you unmute him, we still want to emphasize. That abstinence is the way to go. We don't want to get away from that point. That abstinence, if you abstain, you will not become pregnant and have to deal with all of these repercussions. So the Bible says, flee youthful lust. It means to run as fast as you can, get away from it. Do not put yourself in any position that will compromise what you think you believe, and to show how strong you are, and you're not strong because the devil is stronger than you. So we have to encourage our young persons to abstain
Yes.
I want that to be our takeaway as well.
Thank you, Sister Clara. And even as you mentioned that, I think it was mentioned earlier, and I don't think we really spoke to it in a forceful way, is that inappropriate engagement in sex, pregnancy is not the worst thing that could happen to you. And I think that's something that, was just mentioned about these STDs and so forth. I don't think we emphasize that enough, as everything Sister Clara was mentioning, that the consequences, and pregnancy is not the worst thing that can happen. Because truly, and when you look at the horrors of STDs, including HIV and etc., you don't want young people to be exposed to, those kind of risks. So we have to really help them. But even in the wrapping up, I think Sister Clara actually look at my notes, because I was really, she touched points. So I just have to mention, I don't have to go into them because she did beautifully. And it's really 3 things is that we have to join the conversation. Again, in a non-judgmental way, we have to, the subject is no longer taboo. Sex is on the table, sexuality, we have to engage the conversation. Secondly, we have to learn the language of our young people, the language of today's day. We have to get one of the things that's happening in our church, we have a very thriving Latino ministry, a growing Latino ministry. And pastoring Spanish-speaking people, not being a Spanish speaker, is a challenge. So I have to, by force, learn the language. And by God's grace, Lord's helping me in terms of that, because I have no choice. So we have to learn the language of the youth and what's happening there. Of course, again, we have to engage the technology. Don't be afraid of it. Engage with technology. I was just getting some problems, unmuting myself, right? And of course, my grandson, in fact, today he asked me for my phone because he wanted to record, do a video on something he saw passing. And, he says, just hand me the phone. And I tell you. But anyway, the fact is we have to engage in technology, but the older ones of us. So certainly, I think they one we can't shy away from. And then finally, as we wrap up, one of the things that I've heard spoken of, it comes out to be what Jesus, how he spoke to the woman who was taken in adultery, and he said, go and sin no more. And this concept of secondary virginity is something that we could speak to and help our folks to know, well, okay, you messed up, but you can start again and you can start afresh. And, that stigma don't have to go with you. And that concept of secondary virginity, I know in a physical sense it's not a real thing, but I think it really psychologically, it can add value, helping that person to rediscover themselves and to wait for the appropriate time to, engage sexually. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kadeen Dorset, Clara Bola, and Pastor Anthony David Chandra. It's been a very interesting night. We appreciate y'all each and every time you come to share your knowledge and your wisdom with us. Thank you to everyone joining us tonight. We will see you again in 2 weeks for another episode of Real Talk Family Life. I'd like to hand over to Pastor Anthony Henry to bring greetings and to say thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sutherland, and I know Dr. Neff and Pastor Samuel is there. It's gone, so I'm not going to even bother to call you tonight. We know you're there, and we thank you very much. Let me thank the panelists for joining us this evening. We have just touched the surface of this discussion because, I am thinking that when we start along this particular line, we must address when our son come in and say to me, listen, I don't feel I want to be a boy, I want to be a girl. Whether we want to accept it or not, it's going to happen. When I was graduating from Bible school in 1975, the president of the school said to us, you are going to be dealing with gay marriages in the church. You're going to be dealing with people who were, back then it sounded like crazy, right? It's like if it was, no, you're talking about a man and a man getting married, it's happening. And as a matter of fact, he didn't use the term gay, he spoke about homosexuals. We know them now as gay. So we have to be prepared. And so the discussion, I'm hoping in the new year, that we are going to take this to where it's supposed to be. How do we deal with transgenders? How do we deal with people who are homosexuals and the polyamorous? How do we deal with these individuals in treating with them in the church? Because we have to win them. We have to bring them to Christ. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and the Lord bless you. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you for your patience for staying on with us. We do appreciate it very much. Have a good night, everybody. Please open your mic and say good night. Unmute your mic and say good night. Please tell the Paladins good night.
You can
Good night, everyone. Enjoy the topic.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks, Sister Maria. Stop the YouTube feed, Pastor Henry.
Yes, thank you.